Hey, Moto Warriors. I am not too far near a town, or not too far from a town that's called Plainfield, Wisconsin. And I remember reading a book about a guy named Ed Gein back in the, I think it was the 1950s, I think. And how he had, was raised by a mom that, I guess the dad died or something when he was fairly young, and the mom was like really dominating and domineering and just like really aggressive and mean and hateful and all that kind of crap. And he was always, trying to please his mom, and he was never good enough and whatever. And at some point the mama died, and he had the farm all on his own, and he started turning out to be a cannibal. And then I remember reading the book, and then I met a girl today that her uncle was actually the first deputy to, it was her dad's oldest brother, and he was the one who actually found the sheriff's mom hanging upside down, gutted in the shed. And what had happened is that this Ed Gein guy, out in the middle of nowhere, and there was a small town, and back then, there wasn't a whole lot of people in the town. It's still a really small town. I've been through there. It's just pretty small, but back then it was even more small, smaller. And the guy, there was a little grocery mini mart type, store, whatever, little, country farm store. They had a little of this, little of that, and all that. And he would go into that farm store, and the lady that ran the store was the mom of the sheriff of that county. And they started noticing that graves that had been, people who had been buried not too long before, all of a sudden it looked like the grave had been dug up again. And they would just, whatever, and they'd, rake back over it and not think much of it. And then a couple of people turned up missing, and one of them was the mom of the sheriff that owned the little store in this Plainfield town or whatever. And she from what it sounds like, is that she wrote down that he had bought, because back then they didn't have the, computers and whatever, so she would write in a ledger who bought what, and, whatever, how much it was, or if it went on their bill, and then when the crops, were harvested and they got money, then they would pay off the bill, that kind of thing. Well, they had looked and saw that he was the last customer that the mom had recorded, and he came in and bought some, I don't know, like a hatchet or something, or an axe, and some ammunition for his rifle. And they didn't think nothing of it. And so they're trying to figure out what happened to the mom, and they went and questioned him, and talked to him in town or whatever when they saw him, and he said he didn't know, but he liked her a real lot, and said she was a really sweet lady, later that day or whatever, and said hope everything was okay with her. And the next thing you know, he's going around to other farmers and people in town that that were nice to him, and he'd give them up, give them some meat wrapped up in meat wrapping paper or whatever, and he'd give them some meat. And these people had no idea that he was actually feeding them human flesh. A lot of them had to go through years and years and years of psychiatric counseling. But to make a story that's interesting, creepy, and scary, and whatever, gross, to make it a little bit shorter, it ended up being that people started wondering about him, because all of a sudden he's getting all this meat. And so the sheriff said, hey, told some of his deputies, you guys, I want you to run out there and see if maybe he's poaching, too many deer, And so they went out there, and they said something to him, and next thing you know, one of them, the deputy that was the girl that I met, it was her dad's oldest brother, her uncle, and he ended up having to go into the smokehouse, or the shed or whatever, the cooling shed where you hang meat and stuff, whatever. And when he opened it up, he saw the sheriff's mom naked, gutted like a deer, with her hands and feet chopped off, and meat hooks through her ankles as she was hanging upside down. He saw it, threw up, called for the other deputy that was out there with him, he came out. By that time, they saw, you know, Ed Gein come out, and they drew their guns on him and whatever. And the next thing you know, the sheriff came out, and they were telling him, don't go in the shed. And, you know, they blocked him. They wouldn't let him go see his mom like that. And I don't blame him. Man, I wouldn't want to see my mom like that, would you? But anyway, so turned out being that they nailed him on it. And when they got in the house, they started finding furniture and lampshades and all kinds of stuff that were made out of human flesh. He had bowls, you know, soup bowls made out of human skulls, and he would take and cut the breasts off these women that he dug out of the grave, and he would try to like dry up the skin, you know, like tanning the leather or whatever as you would. And then he'd make like fake boobs, and he'd put them around his chest, and then take their girly parts and do the same thing, and then tie it around his boy parts. And you know, he would tell the story about how he'd go out in the moonlight dancing, trying to please his mom, and because she was always telling him, you know, I wish I'd have had a girl, I wish I'd have had a girl, or whatever. And so basically Ed Gein was mentally insane, and so they put him in a what's it called, Mendota mental health facility. I forget what she told me, but they put him in this, you know, insane place. And many years later, apparently they said that he was okay and that he could be released into the public, because whatever the issues were with his mom and stuff, you know, he was past that, and they said he was fine. But word got out they were considering releasing him, and the people in this community contacted them and said, if you release him, he'll be dead within a half an hour, and you'll never catch who did it. And so they decided, you know, maybe not a good idea, so they kept him in there till he died. But his house, they were going to turn his house into a gross museum, and the shed and all that, and local people found out and said, we don't want to be known for that. And so they went in the night, a bunch of them, and burned down the entire barn, the sheds and the house, everything just burned to the ground. And then they put a marker up saying where he was buried, and he's not actually buried there from what it sounds like. And you know, pretty crazy, man, because there's people that are nuts that would dig up the grave just to get to the stuff. But anyway, there's my story for the day, Motor Warrior. So that's kind of creepy, but then there's Jeffrey Dahmer too, that happened in Wisconsin. And I'm sure you heard about Jeffrey Dahmer. Right as that was ending, we were living in Milwaukee, or as that was happening, I mean, we were living in Milwaukee, and I went to church with one of the detectives that worked on that case, and maybe I'll share that story with you one day. Depends on the results of you all hearing this one. You all might say, like, man, I don't want to hear that gross crap. but if you like hearing stories about weird people doing weird stuff, maybe I'll tell you about Jeffrey Dahmer and some other experiences I had when we lived in Milwaukee for like 4 or 5 years. But anyway, Motor Warriors, I appreciate y'all. I don't think this is the road I want to be on, so I'm going to turn around here. But thanks for watching, and as always, live your life with the heart of a Viking warrior. Bye for now.